Hello everyone, welcome in this round of AGC webinars. My name is Suzana Ayeti, Account Manager for AGC and the PCB's organizer for this session. Today's topic is FSMS, preparing your food safety audit. We will cover overview the pre-certification process, understanding your CB, application process, and selection of auditors. Also, we will focus on recommendations on what to do after the audit. This webinar will be presented by PCB Certified Trainer and Managing Director for Quality Systems Solutions and Initiatives, Ms. Sheryl Anderson. Feel free to write your questions and comments in the question box in the right-hand control panel, and Ms. Anderson will answer to them accordingly. Moreover, if you want to participate directly in the discussion with Ms. Anderson, you can also raise your hand, and then we will unmute your microphone, and you can make your questions directly to her. Please, Ms. Anderson, you may start the presentation.
Thank you, Susanna. Good morning, everyone. It's really good to have you for this webinar, and I want to make sure that I add value to whatever processes, whatever systems you are managing, because being managers or consultants or auditors, we need to make sure that we are doing the best for our company. So I'm helping you to prepare for your food safety audit. As I said before, Susanna said before, I'm Sheryl Anderson, and those are my contact details. I'll show you this at the end of the training as well. I specialize in ISO 9001 and the QSSI food safety standards, as well as ISO 22000 and HACCP. Now, one of the biggest parts of the major projects for any company is the implementation of a system, a management system, especially if it is internationally recognized. So there may be several types of food safety systems that the company may want to implement. Now, what we normally start with is the actual implementation of these food safety systems. And it may last, it may be over 9 months to 2 years for some companies, depending on the amount, the size of the company, or the amount of the employees, or the level of risk associated with the product, or the amount of processes involved in making your product. So that will actually affect or determine the implementation time. Now, when you're going through the implementation process, it's really about changing the culture within the organization, changing mindset, changing the usual ways of doing things within the organization, making sure that you're implementing your prerequisite programs or your operational prerequisites, making sure that persons are adequately trained in the requirements, trained in doing their internal audits, and also one of the key areas of the implementation process is making sure that you have the relevant and appropriate amount of documentation to support the system. You want to make sure that you have adequate amount of documentation, appropriate documentation, but you want to be careful not to over-document yourselves when you're implementing the system, because you want to make sure that your system is nimble, flexible, and it is, if you're there to produce juice, that is what you're not there to produce documents, you're there to produce juice, to get the juice outside the organization. So you don't want to have too many documentation in the system that makes you a lethargic company. Now, the next step is to conduct your internal audits or your pre-certification audit. Now, depending on the size of the company, some persons may have persons within the organization that is evaluating the performance of the organization. Or in some cases, small companies may contract external auditors to conduct their pre-certification audits. But what is essential is that your auditors are adequately trained to evaluate the performance, first of all. Make sure that you have identified any areas for improvement, and if there are any non-conformities raised, which I would have expected during the internal audits, that you implement the relevant corrective actions. And then the next stage is when you have applied to the certification body and you now conduct the stage 1 and the stage 2 audit. And we'll go a little bit into that, but I just wanted to give you an aerial shot of the journey towards certification. Now, there are different types of standards that you may implement, and there are several of them, like the QSSI standards or the Global Food Safety Initiatives, such as Safe Quality Foods, the BRC, and FSSC 22000, and these are the more internationally accepted standards. There are other standards such as HACCP and the GMP audits that you may want to do. Different companies require different standards, and you require these different standards based on you require certification based on various things, and we'll look at that in 2 slides down the road. Now, what you have to make sure, or you have to bear in mind, that the certification body that you choose is accredited to offer these types of certification. Make sure that you do adequate research on the certification bodies, and there are many of them out there. And you may want to choose a certification body based on the fact that they are accredited, number one, to offer that standard. It could be proximity to you, so as you want to reduce the plane fare or the cost of travel, or and you would also want to look at cost as well. One thing I should point out that that HACCP, they do not, most certification bodies don't have accredited programs for HACCP. It's just that these certification bodies may have implemented ISO 17021, which is a standard that all certification bodies should have implemented. However, they normally offer unaccredited certifications for HACCP and GMP. So that is something that you should also bear in mind. Now, the certification process, this is an overview. Normally the CB would give you a quote, and you can get the quote at any time during the process. When you begin the implementation process, you can get the quote just to get an understanding of what it would cost. But technically, the certification process starts at the application stage, where they ask you for certain details. For instance, they may ask you about the number of companies, the number of employees working at the company, the number of HACCP plans, for instance. They would have determined what is the risk level of the product. They also look at your square footage, in other words, how the size of the building or the facility itself. They want to determine whether or not you have only one site or various sites, and at what locations you will have those various sites as well. And when they would have gotten your application, they do that review internally to ensure that they can offer you that certification. As I was saying before, they have to be accredited to offer you that certification. So you may find that some companies certification bodies may be able to offer certification for SQF, but maybe not BRC. So depending on the type of depending on the type of standard, they will determine whether or not they should go ahead with continuing the certification process. Then there's normally a document review. Then there's the assessment. Usually they may have some non-conformities, and you're expected to implement those corrective action, and they will do follow-up if necessary. And then there's a certification decision, which is done by an independent set of persons. And finally, you are expected to do surveillance or reassessment at intervals. Usually it will be done every year. The surveillance will be every year, or some companies do recertification every year, as in the case of SQF or BRC. Or you may have a 3-year cycle to do the reassessment, but they do conduct an audit every year. Now, this is what I'm speaking about when I'm saying, why is it that you want to be certified? You have to know what your reasons for certification is. you may want to say, intrinsically, I want my company to be better. I want to increase in efficiency. I want to improve my processes. I want to have a structured system in place. It's a better way of doing business. Or it could be extrinsically motivated, where it is required by a company or one of your customers. Say, for instance, the big box stores like Walmart or say Costco or one of those bigger companies may want you to implement the standard in order for you to do business with them. So that is something that is extrinsically motivated. It could be brand recognition, it could be a competitive edge that you want to establish. But if you are going to tell me that you want a certificate on the wall, that is not an adequate reason for certification. But the fact is, some people just want a certificate. That's not the best reason for wanting certification. Now, there are 3 quadrants associated with certification, and certification bodies will audit you based on the type of company you are. Now, if you are a new company, they expect that you are just getting familiar with the standard. Your system is new, it is just developing, so they audit you with kids glove. So they are a little bit more understanding of some of the issues or the mistakes that may exist within your organization. Not to say that they won't write you the non-conformities, but they are more understanding that you're a developing system, that you have a developing system, and they take more of a nurturing type audit approach in quadrant 1. However, as you move throughout or you are continually doing your surveillance or your reassessment, they don't want to see you as a company that has just started. You should have demonstrated that there has been some improvements in the system over time, and that is how they are going to audit you over the years. You have to establish that the standard is working for you, and it is helping you to improve your processes over time. Now, this now is the application stage. When you have submitted your application, I've worked with a certification body before, and these are some of the things that I would have done, I should say. Your document review begins here. Once you submit your application form, that is when your document review, that is when you are starting to be scrutinized by the certification body. They check your website, they look at the information that you provide in the application form. There are times they will do searches on search engines just to see what type of company you are, and they look at media reports as well. You have to understand that certification bodies don't contract with every company that applies, because they want to make sure that they're associated with companies that have, I would say, a healthy image. And it may be discriminatory in a sense, but remember that the certificate that is issued by the certification body belongs to the certification body, and they can withdraw it from you at any time if they see that there's any issue concerning bordering on ethical standards, or maybe, say for instance, they were conducting an environmental audit and you're always letting out effluents in the sea or the harbor. They don't want to be associated with companies that are constantly breaking the law, and you shouldn't. So always remember that the certificate belongs to the certification body, and as I said before, they want to make sure that they are going to be associated with a company that is committed to maintaining that healthy image. Now I'll be giving you some tips throughout at different stages, just to make sure that you are doing the right things in terms of approaching the certification process. Tips I have to offer here is that you must ask for the auditor's credentials. determine what type of auditor you will be getting. Remember that the auditor is the face of the certification body, and you are going to be establishing a relationship with that particular person. One of the things you're going to look at is their competence. You may also want to request another auditor if you determine that there may be a perceived conflict of interest. You're looking at the previous experience of the auditor. Was there any time that there was poor customer service with another customer? So make sure that you ask for the auditor's credentials. Remember that the certification body is providing a service for you, and you want to make sure that you have competent and customer service oriented type auditors coming into your organization. I've had a situation where I've had a client who had some perception that there would have been some bias, and we spoke to the certification body about that, but the certification body basically said, no, I'm going to send this auditor, and they stuck to their guns. Well, what I can definitely say is that if they didn't want to change the auditor, we went ahead and we changed the certification body, just because they did not take into consideration our perceived conflict of interest that we were sharing with them. So it's your process, it's your system. You have to make sure that you get the best certification body working for you. The next stage is usually the document review stage, where the auditor prepares for the audit. So they may look at your manual, they may request your internal audit report, they may request other information, they may request some key procedures, they may request your management review records, but normally one of the first things they ask for is your food safety manual that they would look for, and they would also determine or develop their audit plan, from review of your food safety manual. Another tip, in the development of the audit plan, they would have sent it to you for you to determine whether or not it is a workable plan based on your system. Understand that the audit plan is flexible and you can make some changes, and it will be dependent on the availability of certain persons, or it could be based on when you're processing, etc. So don't think that it is set in stone. You have the right to make changes or request changes to the audit plan, and it may be changed to allow for a seamless operation, because you want to make sure that you are still operating while the audit is coming through, because you still have customers to service. And as I said before, it could be based on availability of person, and it also there could be some emergency situations. But what is important is that communication is key, and you don't want to appear uncooperative even without the person coming onto your site. Usually there's a stage 1 and a stage 2 audit. In the stage 1 audit, they usually look at more from a horizontal perspective, just to see how well the food safety management system has been established. So they look at the food safety documentation, they look at your HACCP plans, they look at your master document index, for instance, to see whether or not you would have established the relevant documentation or procedures. They look at the policy, food safety policy, other policies that is necessary for the food safety system. They would have determined whether or not there's some commitment of the management team. If they are reviewing the management review minutes at that time, they would have looked at decisions taken. They would have looked at the competence of your auditors as well when they review your internal audit system, and what type of approach you used in auditing. They would also look at your corrective action system, and whether you have closed out any non-conformities from that internal audit system. I've often told persons that one of the areas that the certification body enters a typical food safety management system is through the internal audit system. One of the first set records they review, because they want to see the robustness of your internal audit system. If you have a good, robust internal audit system, that is a positive already. So they look at the depth of your audit to see whether or not you have assessed the system vertically under and done a proper scrutiny of the system, because what they see, the certification body auditors would have established that if you have a good internal audit system, it's more than likely that the food safety system is operating as it is operating above average or as required. Another tip I would like to give to you is that you want to reduce anxiety by preparing employees for the audit and explain to them what is it that they should expect. Ensure that the employees interact with the external auditors in the correct way, and that may be, you may ask, what is the correct way? In other words, the external auditors are not there to sit and listen to you gripe about salaries or increasing salaries or the beef that I have with the production worker. That is not what they are there for. They are there to look at the system in a very objective way. You're not there to complain to the auditor and say, yes, I'm glad you are here now because I have a lot of stories to tell you. That's not what they're there for. So you have to prepare employees for that. Make sure that all the pre-identified weaknesses in the system are corrected before the audit. And you want to also train employees to give the right answers and avoid common pitfalls. In other words, you want them to be open, you want them to be honest with their answers, and you want them to answer what the auditor is asking and avoid the common pitfalls. I've been in situations where persons want to play superhero and give too much information, and the auditors, they're listening and say, okay, maybe I need to go down this path. You know, so it's sometimes people want to play superhero and then they get people in trouble. Another tip is that you are being audited from the time the auditor arrives to when the auditor leaves, and then some. So even during your lunch and your coffee break, you're being audited. Even during casual conversation, you're being audited. I've had the experience where we are having coffee break, and the auditor is basically looking at your product and saying, okay, let me see if you have the right batch code on the product. So don't be misled to say because it's a break does not mean that there's a break from the audit. It's just a coffee break. You're still being audited. Understand that when you come for the on-site to auditors, is the auditor's first interaction with the organization. It's like getting to know you, almost on like a first date, you know, want to see what type of auditor you are, and the auditor wants to see what type of company you are. So stage 1 gives a good indication of the success of stage 2 though. So even though I spoke about document review earlier on, I don't want to confuse it too much because there are some certification body that conducts a desk audit for the stage 1. Some may choose to do an on-site audit for the stage 1. It's a choice of the certification body, and it could be due to many factors. If it's an overseas body, they may tend to want to do a desk audit, and they may want to Skype in with you. They choose it, as I said, it's based on a number of different factors that the certification body would communicate with you. But the stage 2 timeline, which is now the in-depth part of the audit, is at the discretion of the auditor, because at the stage 1 they would have determined whether or not you are ready to proceed to stage 2. But based on the timeline that they would have given you is a good indication of how they see the system. So if they say, okay, I will come and see you in 1 month, that's a good indication, instead of saying, you know, I think I should come and visit you in 3 months or 4 months time. So they may say, you know, there are certain things that you may need to implement. So they may give you those 4 months, 3 to 4 months to take care of those areas of concern. Now, the stage 2 audit, when you're involved in interviewing of staff and aligning to what management believes. So you match what the staff is saying to what management is saying to you, because management will say, okay, this is what is happening, but no, the auditor goes and conducts his interviews, review the records, and also do observation and match it with what management is saying, because sometimes they are not aligned, and that is the role of the auditor. Sometimes they are aligned as well. All right, and so the stage 2 is an in-depth focus on the system. Is in-depth auditing is more vertical, it's going deeper, it's going more scientific. And one tip I can say is that when you look at your procedure, there's always a reference to the records that would be generated as a result of this particular procedure. So you usually find that the auditors will look at the look at the records that are supposed to be generated, and those records should also match with what is on your records list. So if an internal audit procedure says that there should be 5 records generated, make sure that those 5 records are also on your records list as well. That is always a very simplistic way of reviewing records, and I recommend that you do that too. Do that preparation before the audit. Make sure what is on your records in your procedure is also on your records list as well. In the stage 2 as well, it involves people. They are looking at connecting the strategic to the operational. They are looking to see that the policies and the procedures are understood. They are making sure that employees are trained based on their interviews and their observation, based on the documents, the records. They want to know that it's not 2 systems that is set up. A food safety system on one side and then the business on the other side. It should be an integrated system, as that is what they're looking for. And in auditing, there are different methods for determining or collecting information: interviews, observation, review of records, etc. Another tip is that, you know, perfection raises suspicion, because I've never seen a perfect company in my years of auditing or consultancy. So if there was a mistake, just show how you implemented the corrective action. It's not perfect. Good things are planned, but bad things happen. So if you have a perfect system, it's tick, 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 everything is fine, everything is hunky-dory, I would really want to see a company like that. But up until now, I've never seen that. So perfection to me raises some suspicion. Make sure that you have your major documentation prepared or accessible. It could be in the meeting room, but you don't want to say, okay, my records are over on site 2 and I'm on site 1, so it's going to take me 15 minutes to go and take up the records for the audit. So try to make it as accessible as possible. And don't, if it is time to interview a particular person, don't let the auditor wait on that person. As the management rep or the HACCP coordinator, or food safety coordinator. Prepare people. Say if it is 10 o'clock, make sure that the person is there 5 minutes to 10 or 10 o'clock. Don't let the auditor wait, because the auditor has a finite and a limited time to conduct the audit, and it can be frustrating for the auditor as well to be waiting for persons. Now, when you would have conducted the audit, there may be some non-conformities that would have been issued. What are the implications? If you've gotten a major non-conformance, more than likely they will conduct a follow-up audit. They want you to implement the corrective actions. If it's a minor non-conformance too, they may ask you to conduct the root cause analysis, as with a major as well, and also submit the corrective action or corrective action plan. But how quickly you submit your corrective actions or implement your corrective actions affect your certification timeline. So your certification timeline is dependent on you. So the tip I can offer you is that you prepare them early, form root cause analysis teams so you can solve problems quickly, be clear and concise, and if they are rejected by the auditor, ask for a justification as to why it was rejected. Ask for clarification if you need it, because you want to know where you go wrong. And that is what the auditor is there for, to guide you and to let you know where you are having issues. Now, the recommendation of the auditor is always considered, because after the audit, they would have submitted their report and their non-conformities or their whatever corrective actions that you would have submitted to a separate committee. So the recommendation is still considered by that committee. So if the auditor says that I'm recommending you for certification, that is something that is considered, but understand that the auditor is not the one who makes decision on certification. It's a separate independent person or committee, that makes that decision. Usually their turnaround time is 1 month, and afterwards the certificate is issued. But remember that the certification body owns that certificate. It is not owned by the company. Please let me stress that it is not owned by the company. A tip: external audits are rarely as daunting as first feared. So especially for the first audit, you find that, persons are a little bit intimidated, but it's really as daunting because all the stress and the anticipation, the apprehension, I know the feeling associated with it, but it's after when all the process has been completed, it's just a sense of relief. Remember that the auditor is looking for a system which meets the organization's needs as well as making sure that you're compliant with the standard. So you should always make sure that you have a good attitude towards the audit. It's a partnership that you have established with the auditor. So make sure that persons who are involved in the audit, management, line staff, that they have a good attitude towards the audit. And you have to demonstrate that you have an improvement culture, good knowledge of the management system with your personnel. That is what is going to impress an auditor overall. It is, and working from a certification body, as a certification body auditor myself, I want to see that you are committed to making changes or improving if necessary. And when you have a good attitude towards audit, that is a positive in my book. Get everyone excited about the audit and involved. During the audit itself, if it's a 2-day audit, give people updates over the 2 days, because you want to relieve the tension, because remember that all your personnel have a vested interest in the certification process. So relieve that tension. Understood too that you have to be prepared for non-conformities. So non-conformities are basically ways that it highlights the areas of weaknesses, but it offers you the opportunity for improvement of your system. So be prepared for it. Don't see it as a bad thing. So if you go out and say, okay, I got zero non-conformances in this audit, it does not mean that you have zero non-conformances in your system. It is just that the auditor did a snapshot of the system, and based on what they saw zero non-conformities. It may happen that you have another auditor, or he comes at another time and you get 7 non-conformances, and you say, but I had 0 the last time and now I have 7. It happens. Remember, it's a snapshot. So be prepared for non-conformities. One thing I can say is that external auditors rarely rewrite a non-conformity found in a recent audit unless they consider it critical. I've seen instances where they rewrite a non-conformity because they think that management is not addressing that particular non-conformity. I've also had to rewrite some of these non-conformities because I wanted to stress the importance of a particular non-conformity within the organization, and maybe at that point the management rep is not seeing management addressing that non-conformity, so they'll give that non-conformity more attention when the external auditor writes that non-conformity. But understood that the external auditors are independent, so take their findings seriously. They have nothing to lose. They only see that as helping you. So make sure that you close out the non-conformities. Ensure that the team remains motivated. And as I said before, have a team approach to corrective action implementation. And lastly, I want you to celebrate when you know you have gotten that positive certification decision. But my caution would be that implementation is just the beginning. It is easier to implement than to maintain the system. So try to understand that you have just gotten over this first part of the process, the easiest part. This may seem a little bit hard, this may be hard to digest, but actually, as I said before, implementation is easier than maintenance of the system. So I wish you all the best, and hope that whatever I've offered you this morning is of value to you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. We will go ahead and take some time for questions now, as if you've finished. Ms. Anderson, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. So we will go ahead and take some time for questions now. The first question is ISO 22000 same as HACCP with some extension?
ISO 22000 is a combination of quality management requirements as well as HACCP. And you'll find more of the HACCP requirements in clause 7 of the standard. So where you have to do your hazard analysis, identifying the critical control points, doing your verification and validation, that is a HACCP element of ISO 22000.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, can you give examples of what auditors are looking for to gauge, prove management commitment to the food safety system?
Okay, they look at first the management review. The management review minutes can tell you a lot about how the organization looks at the system. If you see that they are not just identifying certain non-conformances, but to say, how do we address it? Are we closing out the corrective actions on time and making sure that there are follow-up reviews of those elements. That is an indication of management commitment. Sometimes people put up a food safety policy and think that it is management commitment. That is not the only thing that represents management commitment. But you can look at the review minutes, you can look at how involved they are in getting updates or making sure that the system is working. I think that is one of the, or even providing the adequate resources to make sure that the system works, whether it is in form of training, the maintenance of the building, implementing the projects that, for instance, a food safety coordinator may see as necessary. So the allocation of resources, number one. Number two, management reviewing the system is another thing that would indicate whether or not they are committed to the process.
Thank you. Is the certification timeline dependent on the submission of the corrective action plan or completion of same?
Let me explain what is corrective action plan. Plan is when you have done the root cause analysis and indicated to the certification body that this is my plan for implementing the corrective actions. In some food safety audits, they want you to implement the corrective actions and show them that you have implemented those actions. So yes, it is dependent on how quickly you submit the correct evidence, of the corrective actions. And in some cases, they will just look at the corrective action plans. I can tell you for the HACCP audits, you have to implement the corrective actions and give them evidence of those actions. Whereas maybe for FSSC 22000, you may submit the corrective action plans. Note, however, that if it is a major non-conformance, you have to show evidence of implementation of the corrective action and not the plan itself, and not submission of the plan.
Thank you. The next question is, can stage 1 and stage 2 audits be combined?
In some, yes. Some certification bodies do that. I've seen that in cases where, for instance, if it's an overseas certification body, it's based on distance or location, that it can be combined. And it is done to save the company money. So instead of me flying to that particular location to do the stage 1 and then flying back again to go do the stage 2, you may find that the certification body may agree to combine both of them. And sometimes I've been in situations where I encourage my companies to do that if they have an issue with cost.
Thank you. And the next question is, you refer to a food safety manual. Is a manual required by the standard, meaning ISO 22000?
Not necessarily. When we talk about a food safety manual, I am broadly referring to, I'm also going to include procedures manual in this case. For instance, some food safety manuals may have different types of documents. For instance, it may have the governing policies and it may have the HACCP plan as that manual. However, there are some companies that may have the food safety manual that also contains the procedures, and those are usually found in smaller companies. So to put it more correctly is that there are certain policies and procedures that are required by the standard, but depending on how you choose to present it, whether you want to present in a food safety manual form or your procedures manual form.
Thank you. And the last question for today is, can you give us any simple tips and tricks when preparing for the audit process?
I think I've given as much tips as possible in terms of, because there are some tips contained throughout the presentation. I think you should look at it as a whole and there's no one magic tip. It's a combination of things that you should do in order to present the food safety management system to the certification. So I can't give you and say this is the actual magic tip out of all the tips. But the only thing I can say is always have a good attitude towards audit. So I would say go back to the presentation and look at all the tips in combination.
Thank you. And we have one more last question. It says, if stage 1 and 2 audits are combined, will the auditor continue with the stage 2 if there is a major nonconformity in stage 1?
Well, it depends on the policies of the certification body. If they find that it is too critical and non-conformance to continue, they will call into the office. The auditor will call the office of a certification body and they will make a decision at that point. So it is not to say because you found a major non-conformance you should stop the audit. No, it depends on the criticality of the non-conformance. It could be that I stop the audit because I'm not getting the cooperation from the company. So it's various factors that can contribute to that decision. So I cannot rightly, it's going to be dependent on what the auditor is experiencing at that time and what the decision of the office, that is the back office at the certification body, what type of advice, what type of decision they make as related to that particular audit. So it is based on the circumstance at the time.
Thank you once again for this presentation, Ms. Anderson. I would also like to thank all the attendees for taking the time out of their busy schedule to join us. We hope you enjoyed this webinar. We received all your questions, and because the time is limited, we will answer to your questions individually by email. Also, don't forget to check PECB's webinar schedule on our website, pecb.com, or our official social media network. See you next Friday, and have a great weekend, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Susanna.